I sat at my vanity, watching the steam die from the ceramic cup my mother had set down 20 minutes ago, forgotten the moment she'd walked back out of my room. It didn't matter. Nothing I touched seemed to stay warm for long. The morning light slanted through my bedroom window, catching dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts between me and the mirror. I was supposed to be getting ready for the gallery opening. My gallery opening. 3 years of work, of late nights hunched over canvases until my back screamed and my eyes burned, of rejection letters stacked so high they'd become furniture in my studio apartment downtown. And now, finally, the Whitmore Gallery had said yes. I should have been elated. I should have been floating. Instead, I was staring at the empty hanger on my closet door where my jacket should have been. Not just any jacket. The one I'd saved for 8 months to buy, skipping lunches and walking to work instead of taking the bus because it was the exact shade of deep burgundy that made my olive skin glow and my dark hair look like it belonged in a pre-Raphaelite painting. The jacket I'd planned to wear tonight, the night that was supposed to change everything, the night my parents would finally see me. "Lena, have you seen my... Oh." My mother appeared in the doorway, her sentence dying when she saw me still in my robe. "You're not dressed yet. The car is coming in 40 minutes. My jacket is missing." "What jacket?" "The burgundy one, the one I bought for tonight." She waved her hand dismissively, already half turned to leave. "Wear something else. You have plenty of clothes." "I don't want to wear something else. I want to wear my jacket, the one I bought for tonight, for my opening." But she was already gone, her heels clicking down the hallway toward my sister's room, where the real daughter lived. I found it 20 minutes later. I hadn't meant to go into Emma's room. The door was open, which it never was, and I'd just been walking past on my way to ask my mother if she'd seen it anywhere else in the house. But there it was, draped across Emma's vanity chair like it belonged there. Like it had always been there. Like it was hers. My sister was sitting at her desk, her back to me, talking on the phone with that laugh she saved for people she wanted to impress. She hadn't heard me come in. She hadn't heard anything, really, because the world had always been too loud for her to notice me in it. I know, right? It's perfect for the museum benefit next week. I found it in my closet, and I don't even remember buying it, but whatever, it's gorgeous. In her closet. She didn't remember buying it. Because she hadn't, I stood there frozen, watching my sister casually claim ownership of the one beautiful thing I had allowed myself in 3 years of struggling. The one piece of armor I'd built for tonight's battle. And she didn't even remember taking it. "Emma?" She turned, phone still pressed. To her ear, eyebrows raised in that expression of mild annoyance she always wore when I interrupted her existence. "What?" "That's my jacket." "Oh, this?" She glanced at it, like she was noticing it for the first time. "I found it in the back hallway closet. Finders keepers." She laughed into the phone. "My sister's being dramatic, as usual. I bought that jacket 8 months ago. I've been saving it for tonight." "Lena, honestly." She finally put the phone down, sighing the way my mother sighed, like I was an inconvenience they'd both agreed to tolerate. "It was just sitting there. If it was so important, why wasn't it in your room?" "It was in my room, on my closet door, until this morning." Something flickered across her face then, something that might have been guilt in someone capable of feeling it, but it passed so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. "Well, I'm wearing it to the museum benefit. You can have it back after." "The museum benefit is next week. My opening is tonight." "So, wear something else." She picked up her phone again, already dismissing me. "It's not like anyone's going to be looking at you anyway. They'll be looking at the paintings." I stood there for a long moment, waiting for something. An apology. An acknowledgement. Even anger would have been something. But she'd already turned away, already laughing into the phone again, already forgetting I'd ever been there at all. I went back to my room and sat on my bed, and stared at the cold coffee and wondered why I'd expected anything different. Downstairs, I could hear my parents fussing over Emma's outfit for the benefit, even though it was still a week away. My father's voice drifted up through the floorboards, warm with the pride he'd never once directed at me. "My beautiful girl, you'll be the star of the evening." I thought about the stack of paintings waiting at the gallery, the 3 years of my life poured into canvas and oil, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would see me, would really see me, but they never had, and they never would. The opening was everything I dreamed of, and nothing I'd hoped for. The Whitmore Gallery glittered under crystal chandeliers, filled with people who actually seemed interested in my work. Critics lingered in front of my largest piece, a painting of a woman standing in a doorway, half in shadow and half in light, one hand reaching towards something the viewer couldn't see. I'd called it "The Sister I Never Had." Nobody understood what it meant. Nobody asked. My parents arrived 45 minutes late. My mother in a new dress, my father checking his watch before he'd even made it through the door. Emma hadn't come at all. "Lovely, dear," my mother said, glancing at the nearest painting without really looking at it. "Very colourful." "This one sold," I said, pointing to the red dot on the placard, "for $12,000. "That's nice." She was already looking past me, toward the champagne table. "Is there anything to eat? Your father's starving." They stayed for 37 minutes. I know because I counted. They left without buying anything, without talking to anyone about my work, without once asking me how I felt or what these paintings meant to me, or why I'd spent 3 years of my life bleeding onto canvas. "We're having brunch with the Kapoors tomorrow," my mother said on her way out. 11 o'clock. "Don't be late." I stood in the gallery long after everyone else had gone, looking at my paintings in the empty silence. The sold dots glowed red against the white walls, and I should have felt triumph, should have felt vindicated. But all I felt was the same hollow ache that had lived in my chest since I was 12 years old, and realised that no amount of success would ever make my parents turn their heads my way. That night, I went home to my studio apartment instead of my parents' house. I sat on my fire escape and watched the city lights blur through tears. I'd trained myself not to cry. And I thought about all the ways my life had been a series of doors closing in my face. The job I'd lost because I'd taken time off to help Emma move into her new apartment, only to have her tell my boss I was unreliable. The boyfriend who'd left me for her after meeting her at my birthday party. The inheritance from our grandmother that was supposed to be split equally, but somehow became Emma's alone because she needed it more for her startup. The jacket was just the latest in a lifetime of small thefts, each one taking something I couldn't get back. I thought about calling someone, a friend maybe, if I'd had any left after years of cancelling plans to accommodate my family's demands. A therapist, if I could have afforded one after subsidising Emma's entrepreneurial journey at my parents' insistence. Instead, I climbed back inside, locked the window, and swallowed the sleeping pills I kept in my bathroom cabinet for nights when my thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. I didn't mean to take too many. I didn't mean to take enough. I just wanted to stop feeling the shape of that empty hanger in my chest, stop hearing my mother's dismissive wave, stop seeing the flicker of guilt that Emma had chosen not to feel. The last thing I remember is the cold of the bathroom tiles against my cheek, and the strange, distant thought that at least now they'd have something to talk about at brunch. I woke to the sound of birds, not city birds, the pigeons and sparrows that populated my fire escape. These were different, cleaner somehow, their songs threading through morning light that fell across my face in exactly the pattern it had when I was 17 years old. I opened my eyes to my childhood bedroom ceiling. For a long moment, I just lay there, staring at the crack in the plaster that had always looked like a river delta, the one my father had promised to fix 100 times and never had. My body felt strange, lighter, somehow and when I lifted my hand to touch my face, the skin was smoother than it had been in years. I sat up slowly, my heart beginning to pound with something I couldn't name. My room looked exactly as it had 12 years ago. The posters on the walls, the books stacked on my desk, the uniform hanging on the back of my door for school the next day. My school uniform, the one I'd worn at 17 before I'd left for art college, before everything had started to unravel. I stumbled to the mirror, and the face that stared back at me was mine, but not mine. Younger, unlined, eyes that hadn't yet learned to expect disappointment. I was 17 again. The memories came flooding back then, not the hazy half memories of childhood, but the crystal clear recollections of another lifetime. The gallery opening, the cold coffee, the jacket, the pills, the bathroom floor. I gripped the edge of my vanity and breathed, slow and deliberate, the way I'd learned in the therapy sessions I'd eventually saved enough to afford in my late 20s. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Again. I was alive. I was 17. I had been given something impossible and I would not waste it. The day unfolded around me like a script I'd already read. My mother called me down for breakfast at exactly 7:15, the same word she'd used 1,000 mornings in a row. My father rustled his newspaper without looking up when I entered the kitchen. Emma swept in at 7:30, already dressed and perfect, already commanding the attention of both parents without saying a word. I sat in my usual chair and ate my usual toast and watched them with new eyes. The way my mother's face lit up when Emma spoke, the way my father put down his paper to listen to her, really listen, when he'd never once done the same for me. The small, subtle ways they'd been telling me my whole life that I was the supporting character in my own story. But I wasn't. Not anymore. "Lena, you're being very quiet this morning." My mother's voice cut through my observations, sharp with the particular irritation she reserved for me. "Are you feeling well?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just thinking." "Well, think faster. You'll be late for school." I finished my toast and washed my plate and walked to school the same way I'd walked it 1,000 times before. But everything looked different now. The trees seemed greener, the sky bluer, the air fresher against skin that had never known the weight of adult grief. I was carrying 12 years of memory in a 17-year-old body, and I felt simultaneously ancient and newborn. I knew what was coming. All of it. The boyfriend who would leave me for Emma. The grandmother who would die in 3 years, leaving an inheritance that would somehow become my sister's alone. The art school acceptance letter that my parents would try to talk me out of, because creative careers aren't stable, Lena. Think of your future. The jacket. Always, eventually, the jacket. But this time, I would be ready. The first divergence came 3 days later. I was in my room, working on a painting I'd originally abandoned because my mother had called it a waste of time, and my father had suggested I focus on something more practical. In my first life, I'd put down my brushes and never picked them up again until college, losing 3 years of practice that I'd spent the rest of my 20s trying to recover. This time, when my mother appeared in my doorway with that familiar expression of faint distaste, I didn't stop painting. "Lena, your father and I are taking Emma to look at cars this afternoon. You'll need to start dinner." "I'm working on something." "You're playing with paints. There's a difference." I kept my brush moving, adding depth to the shadow I was building in the corner of the canvas. "I'll start dinner when I'm done." Silence. Long enough that I knew she was staring at me, trying to reconcile this response with the daughter she'd trained to comply. "Excuse me?" I said, "I'll start dinner when I'm done, around 6. That gives you 3 hours to look at cars." I could feel her eyes on the back of my head, could feel her calculating how to reassert control. But I didn't turn around, didn't give her the eye contact she needed to leverage. Finally, she made a sound of frustration and walked away. I smiled at my canvas and kept painting. The boyfriend came next. Arjun, with his easy smile and his wandering eyes, who had made me feel special for exactly 3 months before meeting Emma at a school function and deciding that perhaps the prettier sister was worth the upgrade. In my first life, I'd cried for weeks. I'd blamed myself, wondered what I'd done wrong, what I lacked that my sister possessed. I'd let it hollow me out, this time when he approached me after chemistry class, with that hopeful expression that meant he wanted something. I smiled at him with all the warmth of a closed door. "I think we should take a break," I said before he could speak. His face went through a fascinating series of expressions. Surprise, then confusion, then the particular kind of wounded pride that men wore when they were denied the chance to do the rejecting. What? Why? Because I deserve someone who's actually interested in me. I gathered my books and stood. And you deserve the chance to figure out what you actually want. I walked away while he was still sputtering, and I didn't look back. That evening, Emma mentioned casually at dinner that Arjun had asked her for my number. He wanted to apologise or something, she said, studying her nails. I told him you probably wouldn't want to talk to him. That was considerate of you. She looked up, searching my face for hurt, for jealousy, for any of the emotions she'd come to expect. Finding nothing, she frowned slightly and returned to her nails. I ate my dinner in peace. The months passed and I built a new life from the bones of the old one. I painted. Every day, for hours, ignoring my mother's sighs and my father's suggestions that I consider business school. I entered competitions my first self had been too afraid to try, won prizes that had seemed impossibly out of reach, built a portfolio that would get me into art school without any of the doubt or second-guessing I'd done the first time around. I maintained distance. Not cold, not cruel, but steady. When Emma borrowed things without asking, I took them back without drama, simply reclaiming what was mine and moving on. When my parents dismissed my achievements, I thanked them for their input and continued doing exactly what I'd planned. When they tried to guilt me into sacrificing my time for Emma's convenience, I politely declined and let them deal with the consequences. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even rebellion. It was simply the quiet act of choosing myself over and over in all the small ways I'd never known were possible. The hardest part was loving them anyway. Despite everything, despite the years of neglect and comparison and subtle cruelty, they were still my family. I could see now, with adult eyes and a teenage body, that they weren't evil. They were simply limited, shaped by their own parents' failures, passing down patterns they'd never examined. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made it hurt differently. The day my grandmother announced she was updating her will, I knew what was coming. In my first life, I'd been absent from this conversation, conveniently scheduled to work at my after-school job, while my parents and Emma sat with grandmother in the study. I'd come home to find it settled, the money divided in a way that somehow left me with nothing. This time, I called in sick to work and sat in that study with them. My grandmother, frail but sharp-eyed, looked at me with something that might have been approval. "Lena, I didn't expect you to be here." "I wanted to be part of this conversation." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Lena, this is really a matter for—" "I know what it's a matter for." I kept my voice calm, level. "And I'd like to be included." The conversation that followed was nothing like my first life. When my father suggested that Emma's business plans would benefit from a larger share of the inheritance, I spoke up. "I have plans too. Art school isn't free." "Art school," my mother said, as if I'd suggested professional basket weaving. "Our art school. And I'd like grandmother to know that I intend to use my education to support myself, to build something meaningful just like Emma plans to do with her startup." My grandmother watched this exchange with interest. When she spoke, her voice was dry but not unkind. "I've always believed in equal treatment. Whatever I leave will be divided equally between my grandchildren. That was always my intention." The look on my parents' faces told me everything I needed to know about whose intention had shaped my first inheritance. "Thank you, grandmother." She nodded at me, and I saw in her eyes a recognition that I'd never noticed before. She knew. She'd always known how I was treated, and she'd tried, in her way, to protect me. I left the study feeling lighter than I had in years. 3 years passed in the strange, accelerated way that time moves when you know what's coming. I graduated high school. I got into art school. I painted and studied and grew into the artist I'd always wanted to be, but faster now, without the years of self-doubt that had slowed me down the first time. I made friends, real friends, people who saw me and valued me and expected nothing but my authentic self. And through it all, I watched my sister and my parents continue down the path I'd already walked once before. Emma's startup launched to great fanfare and greater expectations. Our parents invested their savings, bragged to everyone they knew, centered their entire social identity around her certain success. For 18 months, everything seemed golden. Then, slowly, it began to crack. I knew exactly when it would happen, down to the month. I knew about the business partner who would embezzle funds, the market shift that would make her product obsolete, the cascade of failures that would leave her not just unsuccessful, but deeply in debt. I could have warned them. In my first life, I hadn't known to warn them. In this life, I chose not to. It wasn't cruelty, it was simply understanding that some lessons can only be learned through experience, and that protecting people from the consequences of their choices isn't love, it's control. When the startup collapsed, I was 20 years old and preparing for my first solo exhibition. My parents called me home for a family meeting, the first time they'd ever summoned me for anything that wasn't meant to serve someone else's needs. I drove to their house on a Tuesday evening in October, the trees just beginning to turn, the air carrying that particular crispness that always made me think of endings and beginnings. The house felt smaller than I remembered, the furniture more worn. My parents looked older too, anxiety having aged them faster than time alone could account for. Emma was sitting in the living room when I arrived, her face a mask of composure that couldn't quite hide the fear underneath. She was 23 now, beautiful as ever, but there was a brittleness to her that hadn't been there before. "Lena," my mother's voice was strained. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." I sat in the chair across from my sister, the same chair I'd sat in for 1,000 family meetings, where my role was to listen and agree and support. But this time, I didn't fold my hands in my lap. I didn't make myself small. I waited. "Your sister's business has encountered some difficulties," my father said, using the same diplomatic tone he'd used to describe a minor inconvenience rather than a complete financial collapse. "We're hoping, as a family, we can find a way to help her through this transition." "I see." I looked at Emma directly. "What kind of help are you looking for?" She couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I need money, enough to pay off the debts and start fresh somewhere else." "How much?" The number she named was staggering. More than I had, though only barely. Enough to wipe out my savings, my grandmother's inheritance, everything I'd built toward my future. "And you're asking me because your family." My mother's voice had that edge of command she'd always used to bend me to her will. "Because we've always supported each other. Because your sister needs help, and you're in a position to give it." I let the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable. "I remember," I said slowly, "when I needed help with art school tuition, when the scholarships didn't quite cover everything, and I was going to have to take a semester off to work. Do you remember what you told me?" My mother shifted in her seat. "That was different." "Was it?" I remember asking if I could borrow money from the family, just for a few months until I could get a part-time job that worked with my class schedule. And I remember you telling me that I needed to learn to stand on my own feet, that depending on family for financial support would only enable irresponsible behaviour, that I needed to face the consequences of my choices. Lena, I also remember that same year when Emma needed startup capital, you emptied your retirement accounts to invest in her business. When she needed a new car because hers was embarrassing, you bought her one. When she wanted to redecorate her apartment because she was hosting investors, you paid for the furniture. That was business, my father said weakly. An investment. And this? I gestured at the scene before me. What is this? No one answered. I stood, gathered my jacket and keys, and looked at my sister for a long moment. She was crying now, silent tears that streaked her perfect makeup. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Compassion. Not the old, self-destructive compassion that would have had me emptying my accounts to save her from discomfort, but something quieter, sadder. The recognition that she was as much a victim of our parents' failures as I was, just in a different way. They taught her that she was special, that the world owed her success, just that she didn't need to develop resilience because there would always be someone there to catch her. And now she was falling, and they couldn't catch her, and she had no idea how to catch herself. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said. I really do, but I can't be the one to give it to you. Not because I don't love you, but because I do. Because the best thing anyone can do for you right now is let you figure out who you are when no one's there to rescue you. I walked out before anyone could respond. My exhibition opened the following month. I'd called it Scene, a collection of paintings exploring visibility, invisibility, and the ways we learn to see ourselves through the eyes of others. The centerpiece was a triptych. 3 versions of the same woman at different ages, each one a little more solid, a little more real, as if she were slowly coming into focus. The reviews were good, better than good. Critics used words like emotionally resonant and technically masterful, and a mature voice emerging in contemporary art. Collectors bought pieces, galleries called. But the moment that mattered came near the end of the opening, when I was standing alone in front of the triptych, a glass of champagne warming in my hand. Lena. I turned to find my sister standing behind me, dressed simply for once, her face bare of makeup and her eyes red from crying. Emma. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the paintings, looking at the sold stickers, looking at the people who were looking at my work with the kind of attention she'd always assumed was her birthright. I didn't know you could do this, she said finally. You never asked. She flinched, but she didn't turn away. No, I didn't. We stood in silence, 2 sisters separated by years of competition and comparison, finally facing each other as something like equals. I took your jacket, she said. That night, the night of your first exhibition, I knew it was yours. I took it anyway because I was jealous, and I hated myself for being jealous, and I thought if I had something of yours, something you'd worked for, maybe I'd feel less small. I thought about that jacket, the burgundy one, the one I'd saved for 8 months to buy. In my first life, it had been a symbol of everything I'd lost. In this life, I'd never bought it at all. There had been no need. I'd known even at 17 that no piece of clothing could give me what I was looking for. I know, I said. You know? I've always known. She started crying again, but differently this time. Not the performative tears of someone seeking rescue, but the raw, ugly crying of someone finally facing something they'd spent their whole life avoiding. I don't know how to be me, she whispered, without being better than you, without being Mum and Dad's favourite. I don't know who I am when I'm just me. I reached out and took her hand. It was the first time I'd touched my sister with genuine affection in longer than I could remember. Then maybe it's time you found out. 3 years after that night, I stood in the garden of my parents' house, watching the sun set through trees I'd climbed as a child. The air smelled like autumn again, like endings and beginnings, like the particular quality of light that had always made me reach for my paintbrush. Things were different now. Emma had gone back to school, quietly, studying social work of all things. The experience of losing everything had cracked her open in ways that proved, surprisingly, to be survivable. We talked, now, really talked, about our childhood, about our parents, about all the ways we'd been set against each other by people who should have known better. We weren't friends yet, maybe we never would be, but we were sisters, finally, in something more than name. My parents had aged, as parents do, and with age had come a kind of reckoning. They'd watched Emma rebuild herself from nothing. They'd watched me succeed without their support or approval. And slowly, painfully, they'd begun to question the choices they'd made, the patterns they'd followed, the daughter they'd overlooked. It wasn't the grand apology I'd once dreamed of. There were no tearful confessions, no dramatic scenes of recognition and regret. Instead, there were small moments. My mother asking about my paintings with genuine curiosity. My father attending my exhibitions without checking his watch. Both of them learning, slowly, to see me as a person rather than a shadow. It was enough, not because I'd forgiven them exactly, but because I'd stopped needing them to be different. I'd stopped measuring my worth against their ability to see it. I'd learnt, finally, that my own eyes were the only ones that mattered. On this particular evening, I'd come to collect a few things I'd left in my childhood room. Boxes of old sketches and notebooks that I wanted to incorporate into my next exhibition. The theme was memory, reconstruction, the stories we tell ourselves about who we used to be. I was in the attic, sorting through boxes, when I found it. A jacket, burgundy, the exact shade of deep wine that made my olive skin glow, and my dark hair look like something from a painting, but it wasn't my jacket. This one was old, vintage, with slightly different buttons and a different cut. A tag inside read Grandma's Treasures in my mother's handwriting. My grandmother's jacket. I held it up to the fading light, remembering suddenly a photograph I'd seen once years ago of my grandmother as a young woman. She'd been an artist too, before marriage and children, and all the expectations that had ground her dreams to dust. In that photograph, she'd been wearing a jacket exactly like this one, standing in front of a canvas, her face full of the same fire I saw in my own mirror. She'd known. She'd always known. And she'd kept this jacket, all those years, for reasons I was only now beginning to understand. I carried the jacket downstairs, past my mother's startled questions, past my father's newspaper, past all the ghosts of a childhood I'd already lived twice. Outside, in the garden, I built a small fire in the old stone pit where we'd once burned autumn leaves. The flames caught quickly, hungry and golden in the gathering dark. I thought about burning the jacket. It would be fitting, wouldn't it, a symbolic destruction of the past, of everything that had once defined me. But as I stood there, holding the burgundy fabric over the flames, I realised that wasn't what I wanted at all. I wanted to keep it, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of survival. A reminder that I came from a line of women who had burned with creative fire, who had been dimmed by circumstances and expectations, but who had never gone out entirely. My grandmother had kept this jacket for 60 years, waiting, perhaps, for someone to understand why. I put it on. It fit. Her fit perfectly. Behind me, I heard the garden door open and Emma's voice calling my name. She'd come to help me carry boxes, she said. To spend time together, maybe. To be sisters. "What are you burning?" she asked, coming to stand beside me at the fire. "Old sketches. Things I don't need anymore." She watched the flames consume paper and possibility, transformation and release. Then she reached into her own pocket and pulled out something small, crumpled. I found this in my room. A receipt from 12 years ago for a jacket I bought, but convinced myself I found. She dropped it into the fire without ceremony. We stood together and watched it burn. "I like that jacket," she said finally, nodding at the burgundy fabric on my shoulders. "It looks like you." It was Grandma's. "I know, I remember the photograph." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I'd never allowed myself to see before. Someone who had been as lost as I was, just in a different direction. Someone who was finding her way back to herself the same way I had. "Do you want to come to my studio tomorrow? I could use a model for a new series I'm starting." She smiled, surprised, uncertain. "You want to paint me?" "I want to paint us. Who we were, who we're becoming. The sisters we never got to be." For a long moment, she was quiet. The fire crackled between us, consuming the last of the old receipts and sketches, making room for something new. "Yeah," she said finally. "I'd like that." We walked back to the house together, past the garden where we'd played as children, past the windows where our parents watched with expressions I didn't need to read. The jacket settled on my shoulders like armor, like inheritance, like the weight of finally knowing who I was. I had been given a second chance, not to rewrite history, but to write something new, not to become someone different, but to become, finally, myself. The fire burned low behind us, turning memory to ash, making room for whatever came next. And for the first time in either of my lives, I walked forward without looking back. The studio was quiet when I unlocked it the next morning, morning light slanting through the tall windows and illuminating dust motes that floated like possibility in the air. I'd bought this space with my grandmother's inheritance, the money that had been mine all along, and I'd filled it with canvas and paint and the accumulated evidence of a life lived on my own terms. Emma arrived at 10, carrying coffee from the shop downstairs, nervous in a way I'd never seen her be nervous before. In our old dynamic, she'd always been the confident one, the one who walked into rooms like she owned them. But this was different. This was my space, my world, and she was the one who didn't quite know the rules. "Where do you want me?" she asked. I gestured to the chair I'd set up near the window, angled to catch the light. "There, and you can relax. This isn't a performance." She sat fidgeting with her coffee cup while I prepared my palette. The colours I'd chosen were warm, earth tones and burgundy, and the particular gold of late morning sun. Sister colours, I'd started calling them in my head. The shades of shared history. "I've been thinking," she said, watching me mix paint, "about the jacket, about all the things I took from you that I didn't even realise I was taking." "You don't have to "I do, please." She took a breath, steadying herself. I was so focused on being Mum and Dad's favourite that I never stopped to think about what it cost you. Or what it cost me, really. Being loved for what you represent instead of who you are, it's its own kind of prison. I set down my brush and looked at her directly. I know you know. That's what makes it worse. You figured it out and I didn't, and I spent years hurting you because I was too scared to face how much I was hurting myself. The silence stretched between us, full of all the conversations we'd never had, all the truths we'd been too protected or too wounded to share. "I forgive you," I said. "Just like that?" "Not just like that. It took me 2 lifetimes to get here." I smiled at her confusion. "What I mean is, forgiveness isn't about you. It's about me refusing to carry the weight of what you did anymore. I forgive you because I deserve to be free, not because you deserve to be forgiven." She nodded slowly, tears tracking down her cheeks, ruining the makeup she'd applied for the sitting. "Can I ask you something?" Anything. When did you stop needing them? Mom and Dad, I mean. When did their opinion stop mattering? I thought about it. About the moment in the gallery when I'd realised that their 37 minutes of attendance meant nothing against the red dots on the walls, the critics' attention, the simple fact of having created something true. When I realised I could see myself, I said. When I stopped waiting for them to turn around and started looking in the mirror instead. I picked up my brush and began to paint. The portrait took 3 weeks to complete. 3 weeks of Emma sitting in my studio, talking and crying and laughing and slowly becoming someone I could recognise as a sister. I painted her as she was, not as she'd been or as our parents had wanted her to be, but as the complicated, wounded, resilient person she was learning to become. When it was finished, I called it The Sister I Finally Found. My parents came to see it, hesitantly, as if entering my space required permission they weren't sure they had. They stood in front of the painting for a long time, my mother's hand finding my father's, both of them silent in a way that wasn't dismissive for once, but simply overwhelmed. "You see her," my mother said finally. "Really see her." "I see both of us." She turned to look at me, and for the first time in either of my lives, I saw something in her eyes that might have been recognition. Not the full understanding I'd once craved, not the dramatic reversal of a lifetime of patterns, but something smaller and more real. A beginning. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all the things I didn't see. For all the ways I failed you. I know." Does that make it better? I thought about the cold coffee on my vanity table, the empty hanger on my closet door, the thousands of small wounds that had accumulated into something nearly fatal. I thought about the bathroom floor and the sleeping pills, and the resignation that had felt, in that moment, like peace. I thought about waking up to birdsong and morning light and the impossible gift of a second chance. "It makes it different," I said. "Different is a start." Outside my studio window, the city hummed with life, thousands of stories unfolding in thousands of rooms, each one as complicated and painful and full of potential as my own. Somewhere out there, a girl was learning to make herself small. Somewhere, a sister was taking what wasn't hers. Somewhere, a mother was turning away without realising what she was leaving behind. And somewhere, in a studio, filled with light and paint and the accumulated evidence of survival, a woman was finally learning to see herself. I walked my parents to the door, watched them make their way down the street toward their car, toward the house where I'd grown up, and the patterns they were slowly, imperfectly beginning to change. Then I went back to my easel and started a new canvas. This one would be different. Not a portrait, not a memory, but something forward-looking. A painting of a woman standing in a doorway, 1 foot in shadow and 1 in light. Not reaching for anything, but simply standing, present, complete. I called it Here. The burgundy jacket hung on a hook by the door, catching the afternoon sun, and I painted with its warmth at my back. The weight of inheritance transformed into something like wings. This was my life now. This was always my life. The one I'd earned through survival and silence, and the quiet, revolutionary act of refusing to disappear. The coffee on my desk was still warm. I drank it while I painted, and I didn't wait for anyone to bring me more.